Well, it looks like the whole world's in the holding pattern with the US elections. When it comes to CIS markets, they probably have the most to gain.
Gene, starting off, could you give us an overview into the opportunities in information arbitrage between local Western and CIS markets, please?
Sure. The term information arbitrage is something that we kind of came up ourselves. Our firm, we focus on generating value for investors and using our experience in CIS markets, investing for quite a long time, over a decade now. We've noticed that sometimes statements are being made by important people, statements are being issued by important companies in CIS region, and things are not as often as they appear. And that information is being taken at face value when there's a lot more going on, typically. As one possible example, it was a trade last year we were very active on. It was a restructuring of Ukrainian national debt. Statements were being made by Minister of Finance of Ukraine of imminent default, harsh restructuring terms, and the asset pricing reacted accordingly. The bonds drastically fell in price, and investors pretty much priced those words in, where we were convinced that it's just a negotiating position, not an absolute fact. So there are quite a few of these instances go on, and I can cite other examples right now with companies like Fairexpo, where there was obviously statements that were made by the company that didn't take into account the bank that belonged to the same shareholder that was failing. So once again, if you know the lay of the land, if you're able to connect the dots, you can make a lot of money.
And following on from that, you've mentioned your insight into Ukrainian bonds. Now taking a look at Mongolian bonds, they've had a recent price fall, but what would you say their value is now?
Well, who knows what their value is in general? It's a very subjective term. But something happened which is quite typical for the whole CIS, even though Mongolia is not really CIS, but for the whole emerging markets region in that part of the world. A downgrade occurs, investors sell off without really looking into any particulars, because typically that kind of asset is not a major holding for anybody. So it tends to be an overreaction. In that case, it was a downgrade by several rating agencies citing potential default, possibility of default, which they have to say because they're covering their basis, and of course, those bonds began to trade at junk levels, at pre-default levels. One thing that investors didn't take into account, or many people didn't take into account, is that EBRD, alongside with a group of international investors, just announced a major investment program into Mongolia, billions, something like over 4 billion of total investment amount. Keeping that in perspective, the entire reserves of Mongolia is about 1.5 billion. So it's over 3 times their total national reserves. Surely there wouldn't be investment this kind of planned if a country was going to default imminently. So once again, we focus on these speculative opportunities where statements are being made, information is being put forth on the market, but the reality can be quite different if you just research a little bit more.
Absolutely. And 2016, all eyes seem to be pointed on the US elections. So how can CIS markets benefit from the US elections? What's the outlook there from you?
Well, it looks like the whole world's in the holding pattern with the US elections. When it comes to CIS markets, they probably have the most to gain. All the candidates, with the exception maybe of Hillary Clinton, don't really have any extensive foreign policy experience. They will be looking to establish that credibility. They'll be traveling to the region. They're going to be making positive statements. They're going to be sounding constructive. And they're going to be looking for some kind of a reset. And nobody, including, by the way, Ms. Clinton, do not want to inherit the foreign policy legacy of the Obama administration. So everyone's going to do their best to have some kind of a constructive dialogue with CIS countries, especially Russia. That's going to feed into investor confidence. That's going to feed into sort of positive momentum. But before that happens, I think we're going to have a lot of rough seas ahead, choppy seas until the US elections.
Absolutely. Well, Gene, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your insights once again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all from myself and Jean once again, but for all the latest Ducoscopy updates and exclusive market moves, keep clicking back.